All right, everybody, welcome back into the Auburn Live Show, the Auburn Live Basketball Show. I am your host, Justin Hokanson. With me, as always, Mr. Alan Head. What's up, man? It's been a minute since we gotten to do one of these.
What's going on, Hoke? Just enjoying watching this most recent edition. I know Bruce has got to be glad that recruiting is finally over, but excited to talk basketball with you all the same, my man.
Well, let's jump into it. Before we do, quick shout out to sponsor of the show, Session Cocktail. Go check them out downtown Auburn, right there on Magnolia Avenue. Friends of the show. Great place to go. Now that students aren't there, it's even easier, I think, to get in there. So if you want to get in there on a weeknight before or after dinner, if you're in Auburn, if you want to make a trip to Auburn, man, make a little trip, come down for a night. If you live in Birmingham or somewhere else like that, Session's an awesome place to go. After dinner, if you go to a restaurant or whatever, or you can do it before if you want, but they do trivia on Tuesday nights and bingo on Wednesday nights. They've started doing happy hour all day on Mondays. So they've got a lot of good reasons to come in there. Great cocktail menu as always. And of course, it's bar seating, it's couch seating, it's some bar stool kind of tabletop seating. No lines, no people crowded around, walking around. It's a good, comfortable place to have a good cocktail. And so go check them out. And if you do, tell them you came from Auburn Live. They'll appreciate that. I'll appreciate that. All right, man, let's jump into this. Auburn's basketball roster is set. They're sitting at 12 scholarship players. Of course, you can have 13, but as we have talked about ad nauseum, Bruce doesn't like to get to 13. He likes to keep that one open. That's his deal. Go argue with him. Okay. Go argue with him. Hopefully we're past that argument. But the roster seems set. So here's what I want to do. I want to go position by position, and I want to look at who they got, and then I want to say, are we better or worse than last year? Kind of look back to where they're at. Obviously, some positions had some overhaul, some didn't. But we can kind of look at where they're at. Do we think they're better or worse than last year? And then probably, hey, is what they've got this year is that championship caliber? Because that's obviously that's where Auburn's at, man. I mean, that's where you should be looking at. I mean, they won the tournament championship, but that's how you should look at Auburn basketball right now. Is it good enough to win the SEC regular season? Is it good enough to make a run at the Final Four? That's the standard where Auburn's at. Now, they've only made one Final Four, but they've got multiple conference championships. But that's the standard. Is it good enough to go those places? I think anything short of that, and you're shortchanging the success of what Auburn's become and sort of Bruce. All right, so let's jump into this. Let's just start at the point guard. J.P. Pegues from Furman. True point guard, that's it. Obviously, now you've got Denver Jones, who we think is going to play a little point. Got Tahad Pettiford coming in from the high school ranks that we think will play a little point. Bruce talked about both those guys recently and said he definitely wants to get the ball in Denver's hands some. And he wants to start Tahad at the 2, but given who he said, depending on who they sign, which ended up being Miles Kelly, a wing player, Pettiford could then slip into some competition for the backup point guard. Well, that's what ended up happening. So now I think you toss Pettiford in there a little bit at the point guard position. What are your thoughts on Pegues, Denver, Tahad? And then how do you sort of see that to Trey Donaldson, Aiden last year? Those two guys are gone, and sort of how it looks like things are shaping up, now.
Justin, I think those are all real fair questions, man. Did we get better? It's always tough when you're trying to evaluate these things, but I do think that Auburn improved. You added a frontline starter in J.P. Pegues, a guy that's a double-digit scorer, which is something that you absolutely needed because guard play just wasn't where it needed to be this time last year, not specifically from a scoring standpoint. You needed a creator at that position. And I think J.P. Pegues brings that to you specifically in the pick and roll game. So looking at that, and you look at the two pieces that you lost in Trey and Aiden, both guys that I thought were still developing, that had probably bright futures at Auburn, but it just hadn't come together in a way that you needed in what I would term as an all-in year for Auburn. I think when you've got a guy the caliber of Janai Broome, you needed to complement him with somebody that was ready to excel in SEC and tournament play, and that's what you brought in J.P. Pegues. Now, the interesting part will be the rise of Denver Jones, who I think was, in a small sample size, was good. He was actually really good at the point guard position, for what little bit he got. I don't think he had more than 40 minutes probably playing the point all season last year. So very small sample size, but what I saw I liked. And then Tahad Pettiford, a young man who's a top 25 basketball player in the country, McDonald's All-American, and someone that is a natural. He played the point a lot in high school. He's a natural scorer, and I think that's why Bruce wanted to kind of get him involved and not take away that natural talent at scoring the basketball. He wanted to acquiesce to his needs and make sure he featured the best part of his game. But at the end of the day, playing point guard is not unfamiliar with Tahad Pettiford, and I think he'll be up to the challenge. And so I think it's an upgrade, Justin. I mean, it's from a depth standpoint, maybe you take a little bit of a hit because you had two guys that were very similar in Trey and Aiden. And then you replace it with a very solid veteran piece in JP Pegues and knowing what you're going to get. And then two guys that don't have as much experience as the two that you lost, but two that you think are very talented and they could probably do exactly what you need them to do in that backup point guard role. And I don't think either of us believe that they're going to be asked to play the same level of minutes that Trey and Aiden were last year either. I think you're talking a much smaller sample size, probably 10 to 13 minutes a night, wouldn't you think? Maybe 15 max, contingent on what you get yourself into.
Yeah. And I said that I thought once SEC play hits, I feel like Pegues is going to play 24 to 28 minutes. Like that's my gut. And that leaves you, a couple rotations, maybe it leaves you, 3 rotations, maybe a 4-minute rotations type deal. And he could play more. I mean, SEC play, he could be 28, 30. It just depends. Is Denver in foul trouble? Is Tahad in foul trouble? Like it'll depend on some of that stuff. I was trying to find some of Pegues' stats. I mean, he's played 95 games. And he, by the way, Pegues was a highly sought after get. We sort of not forget him, but he committed to Auburn so early. I mean, South Carolina wanted him bad. Kansas State wanted him bad. Oklahoma wanted him bad. Florida wanted him very bad. Basically, yes. Auburn beat Florida for him. He averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists last year, shot 87% from the free throw line, 27% assist rate, which is, top 150 nationally, 2-to-1 assist turnover, 15 games of 20 points or more. And he had a pair of 30-point games and a pair of road games, but 15 20-point games. Playing against Samford last year, who, of course, made the tournament and had Kansas beat, he had 33 points in 34 minutes. He played at Arkansas last year and had 21 points and 6 assists. So, a couple of teams that have at least got some talent and some ability, and he played well. I think one of the things that Bruce said about him was high basketball IQ. And he made the comment, Bruce's comment was he'll scratch where it itches. And just simply meaning like whatever needs to happen. If it's feed the ball, he can feed the ball. If it's score, he can score. Like he understands the game and kind of what needs to happen within the game. I think that's an upgrade, right? Like Trey and Aiden, that wasn't their strong suit. Like you couldn't just completely trust them to go run the show. You know what needs to happen when it needs to happen. They weren't those kind of players. They essentially Trey and Aiden last year were, essentially game managers. It was just like, don't turn the ball over, which to their credit, they didn't. They did a pretty good job of not turning the ball over. But as Bruce pointed out, when you get in that mode, it hinders a lot of other things. I mean, now Aiden took a ton of shots. It's not like he was gun shy. He just couldn't hit anything. But I think those guys were so focused on getting into the offense and not turning it over that they weren't really they weren't real catalysts. They were just kind of game managers in that regard, if that makes sense. And so I think JP will change that. I think he's capable of being aggressive, being a catalyst, being an energizer, scoring tough buckets, controlling the flow of the game. I think he gets stuff like that. And so I think that's probably the biggest asset to him. I think you bring up the point, which is I like the possibility of Denver at point. He's a big guard. He seems pretty poised. So I think a couple rotations a game, I think he'll be really good. And then in an emergency, I think Tahad. I think the risk is, what if Pegues gets hurt?
Right.
Or what if Denver gets hurt? Probably probably, Pegues is probably the one you worry about more. What if he gets banged up and has to miss 4 games or something? That's, obviously we could also do that for every team in the country. What if somebody gets hurt? But I think without a true backup, if that happens, obviously then there will be a decision like, okay, do we move Denver over? But I think Auburn's got some options there. But overall, Pegues compared to, let's say, Pegues and Denver compared to Aiden and Trey, and certainly Pegues running the show compared to Aiden and Trey running the show. To me, it's a no-brainer. And probably the biggest, I think maybe the biggest thing that I skipped over was the 95 games of experience. I talked to a source on the staff when they were recruiting Pegues. And at the time, now remember, they were also scouting heavily Miles Rice from Washington State. It was Pegues visited. They were about to bring Miles Rice in. Bruce really liked Miles Rice. They liked them both. And then they just decided to make a push for Pegues and say, hey, listen, are you in or not? Like, let's be in. They got him in the boat. They told Miles Rice, hey, no need to visit. Miles Rice commits to Indiana a few days later. But during that discussion, Miles Rice was a younger player. Maybe his ceiling's higher, but he's a little younger. And I remember talking to somebody. I said, well, given the kind of team you're going to have, I think Pegues is a perfect fit. You're going to have all this veteran experience, Dylan, Janai, Chris, Denver, Chad. You're going to have all these guys that have played a ton of basketball, and you got a roster that's capable of doing something really special. Pegues is the guy you bring in with the experience to match with that. Can you imagine if you brought in Miles Rice, even if he's really talented, does he have the experience that you feel like he could then, you fit him into what you've got coming back, all that veteran experience? Would that have been a good fit, or is it a better fit getting Pegues and saying, I have no worries that Pegues is going to slide right in as a veteran and just be one of the veterans on a veteran team? I thought that was a huge asset. And the person I talked to was like, absolutely. That's one of the big assets, is not just his ability, but his fit with what this Auburn roster was going to be.
No, Justin, I think that is spot on. You had to have a floor general and somebody that could command kids, at certain points of the game. This is a veteran that steps right into that. And you're right. Miles Rice is insanely talented. And I think he's going to be a really good player for Indiana this year. But as far as fit at Auburn, J.P. Pegues, like you talked about, is a guy that has played 95-plus games of basketball in his career at this point. That's a ton of basketball. You've played high-level teams. You've played good mid-major teams. And you're going to be a guy that's not going to be afraid to be vocal in the locker room because of your experience. You're going to be a guy that's not going to be afraid to be vocal when, things are tough and things are tight and you're at the end of a game. And you think about the difficulty that Auburn had in close, 5-point games or less last year, single-digit games. That seemed to be where Auburn had the most difficulty, and not necessarily having that floor general on the floor to be able to collect everybody, get on the same page, make sure you're running the right offensive set, making the right read. Like Bruce said, itching where it's scratched, specifically in the moments that count. I think J.P. Pegues absolutely is going to be able to do that for this ball club. And again, you talk about the backups, and I'm encouraged by the upside that both of them bring. I think both of these are guys that have very bright futures. Denver's obviously more of a natural 2, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But, a guy that maybe if he's going to make it at the next level, maybe it has to be as a 1 or as a combo guy. And so this is going to help prepare him for what comes next in whatever version of professional basketball he plays, whether that's G League, whether that's in Europe, maybe it's in the NBA. Who knows, what happens for him in his career. And then again, I think there's so much to Hod Pettiford's game. And yes, he is a natural scorer, and I think Bruce wants to feature him there just to get him started in his career. But he's a kid that I have very high expectation for, and someone I think that could really transcend that position. Yes, J.P. Pegues is going to be the leader. He's going to be the guy that's getting the major minutes. But as far as upside goes, I think Hod's upside is, through the roof, and a guy that I'm really interested to watch develop. And I think having a guy like J.P. Pegues gives him that added time that Aiden didn't have last year, to be able to learn from someone and kind of garner that experience before he's forced into a position where he really has to play heavy minutes against teams he's not necessarily ready to play against just yet.
Yeah, and that was a point. That was a point Bruce made as well with Tahad, was I think that exact point. I think he said, hey, like for instance, Aiden had to play right away last year. He goes, if I can keep Tahad away from adjusting to the SEC is hard enough from the high school. Adjusting and saying go run the point as a freshman is a lot to ask. And so I think it's a fair point. If Tahad can stay at the 2, we'll bring Alan right back. If Todd can stay at the 2 and dabble with the 1 if they need it, but there's not a pressure on Tahad to come in and not only adjust to the SEC, but adjust to running a team, it's hard. And Aiden had to kind of do that, and he had his bumps and bruises last year. And Aiden probably put a little bit too much on himself. I mean, he's a McDonald's All-American. He shot 50 more threes than anybody else on the team. He didn't shoot well. Aiden's a good shooter as somebody's been at practice, but in the games, it's like his form was, I mean, his feet were never set. I don't care how good of a shooter you are. If you're always leaning one way or the other, it's going to be tough. But I think the pressure not being on Tahad, and really both the guys, by the way, we'll talk about the position later on, but Ja'Kai Howard, there's no pressure on him either. It's not bad to be able to bring in a couple of freshmen, and neither of them should feel pressure immediately to be anything special. Both of them are going to come in and likely, be a backup role, and they can learn and develop. So there's just no pressure on either of those guys. The other interesting point about Pegues, while we wait on Alan to come back, is Bruce also talked about playing Furman. I'd have to go back and look, but Auburn played Furman, I guess, recently, and they played against Pegues, and Bruce said that was another sort of check a box off where, having played against Auburn, Pegues understood how they wanted to play and the pace and what they tried to do. And so you can teach that. Obviously, you could bring somebody in that has no idea what you're going to do, and he's talented, but it doesn't hurt that this kid knows exactly kind of what he's seen it in a game. He understands in a game what you want that thing to look like. And so that was another element that I think Bruce liked about Pegues. So yeah, I think net positive at the point guard position for sure. I thought there were elements that traded well. Boy, Aiden's hard to say Aiden did a lot well. Like, he just struggled. I mean, he didn't shoot well. He wasn't a great defender. The only thing he did is he didn't turn the ball over. That's it. Trey, I thought, brought a little more to the table, was a better shooter from 3. Assist rate was higher, turned it over a tad bit more, but assist rate was higher. But Trey was every now and then he'd make a steal, he'd make a play on defense. He just had a little bit of tenacity that I liked. Although both of those guys are very immature, and I'm all for trading immaturity for maturity when it comes to winning a championship. So I'll leave it at that. All right, so we think plus on the point guard position. Let's talk about shooting guard. You got Denver. You got Tahad, Miles Kelly. We're going to talk about Miles Kelly at 2 positions. One is the shooting guard. Denver comes back, played really well at the end of the year. I can't remember, I wrote about it, but I think he scored double figures in like his last 8 games or something, and shot over 50% from 3 in his last 8 games. I think he was 17 of 32 in his last 8 games from 3. Like, so he started to pick it up. The more he got, remember early in the year, he wasn't great. And there was a little bit of concern, like, but I think he got more settled in and got a little bit more settled into the offense, and some things sort of lit up. And I think Bruce probably would acknowledge it, like, okay, he needs some more specific opportunities, almost the way you would work with Bryce Brown. So you get Denver back. You got Tahad coming in with no real pressure. I mean, other than the pressure he's going to put on himself, but there's no expectation that he has to carry anything. Tahad, just come in there and learn and be good. Be you. There's no pressure to start. And then you got Miles Kelly, who's 6'6", and is really a combo guard wing. He is, from what I was told, he is primarily a 2 that can play the 3 and will play the 3. He's not a 3-2. He's a 2-3. And so he'll compete at both of those. And so you got to toss Kelly in out of that shooting guard position. I think it's interesting. Now, one, if Jones has to play some backup point, you've got somebody like Kelly who, like, you should feel great about being at the 2. The other question about this is how good is Miles Kelly? Like, I've watched a film of him, led Georgia Tech in scoring. He rebounds 5 a game. Good player, and can shoot from way downtown. Is he good enough to push Denver? Like, is he good enough to come in and you go, is it possible that JP starts at the 1 and Miles Kelly starts at the 2 and Denver comes off the bench? I think we're all just sort of assuming Denver's the starter. I probably would at this point too, but Miles Kelly's certainly good enough to where the 2 and the 3 is wide open. I mean, you better just come to play in the offseason at those positions. What's your take on that? Obviously, you lose KD Johnson. God bless him. Allen, God bless KD Johnson. And then that's it. You lose Lior. Lior was probably more of a 3, but it was a guard. Lior was probably more of a 3. But you lose KD and you bring in Kelly. The shooting guard I wrote, and you can disagree, agree, whatever. I think the 2 guard it's maybe the deepest and strongest it's been under Bruce at Auburn ever. I mean, Todd, Denver, Miles Kelly, like there's some really good options there. What's your take on kind of what it looks like now and then the comparison to last year? Obviously, KD's is not your second option. Miles Kelly or Todd might be.
Watching Denver take that step absolutely was encouraging. I think he gave you the best floor spacer you've had at that position in a very long time. And then you add a piece like Miles Kelly, like you talked about. I think he was a little miscast, honestly, given his skill set as a featured number 1 type scorer. I think he needs to be more of a complementary piece, and he'll be that at Auburn. And I think he's a guy with a veteran point guard like JP Pegues and someone that's going to command a low post presence in the way that Janai Broome does. You'll be able to play a lot of inside-outside basketball with him. And he may not average what he averaged last year. I think he'll still be a double-digit scorer and a guy that will probably be more efficient than he was this time last year in the way that he scores. But definitely another spacer for you and a guy that gives you some versatility. And then, like you said, Todd, natural scorer, a guy that probably gives you all the things that you got with KD Johnson from an energy standpoint and a slashing standpoint and the ability to get in the lane and create. But, right now, we don't see those same issues with playing out of control at times and letting that emotion get the better of you and kind of creating some turnovers that you could live without. So I think it's pluses there. And this is not me taking a shot at KD Johnson. I absolutely loved his energy and his effort. But you have to admit the good with the bad. And I think there's some of that with Miles Kelly too, where he forced some things this time last year. Can they work that out of him some and allow him to be more probably what he is naturally, which is that floor spacer, the guy that does have the ability to get to the cup, but you just don't have to be the guy. You get to be one of several pieces and fit into this big jigsaw of, scoring, which should be plentiful on Auburn on the Plains this fall, man, and spring. It should be a lot of different options that you can go to, a lot in the bag for Bruce, where he can run different sets for different guys. But very encouraged by what you have at the 2 guard spot. I mean, I think you're right. That's the deepest position. And if it's not, the position we're going to talk about next in the 3 might be. And it's because Miles Kelly is going to be at both of those spots. So very encouraged about at what we're looking at that position.
Yeah. I mean, KD Johnson, just the reality about KD, like we all try to be fair to him because he brings such an energy that you love.
Right.
But KD was a liability, just straight up. He just was. And he would have moments, but there were more bad moments than good, in my opinion. There's a lot of things you didn't see, letdowns on defense that maybe weren't glaring that you didn't see. But having that gone, even off last year, look, even Aiden and Trey sometimes, like that's 3 players, in my opinion, that you couldn't completely rely on. You just were like, I don't know what version we're getting tonight. And you replace it with some veteran and somebody like Miles Kelly. I think there's a lot more reliability. Not just, hey, I think you're going to do what I say you need to do and you're going to play within the system, but just reliability on, I think, what you're going to get night in and night out from that shooting guard position. I think it's going to be fascinating to see if Miles Kelly can push Denver. Denver came on big time defensively. That's a big deal to Bruce Pearl. So what's Miles Kelly like as a defender? Here's the thing. Miles Kelly's a good enough athlete. I watched a lot of his highlights. I didn't watch every play in terms of his defense. But here's what I'll tell you. Bruce Pearl and that staff and Stephen Pearl and Ira Bowman, they aren't taking a bad defender. They aren't taking a lazy defender. And it's not happening. If you're a guy that's like a pretty good scorer, but he's just like, he just kind of, sluggish on defense, and I don't know how hard he tried, it ain't working. So I don't know what you would rate Miles Kelly as a defender. What I know is he's a really good athlete, and he's coming to a place where he'll play defense or he'll sit the bench. So I'm not overly concerned about what he'll be. Like Denver, we had these question marks. Good offensive guy, average defender. Well, Denver turned into a absolute above average defender, a very good defender. So I don't have any doubts about that. I'm curious to see how Kelly develops, but I'm just curious to see if he can push Denver, if he can push that. And look, man, how great is that? As good as Denver was and as good as he came on, how great is it now? Miles Kelly's coming in. Denver's like, man, I've been here a year. I'm the incumbent, but there is absolutely no sitting on any laurels. That dude's coming in and he'll push me, and you better be good if you're Denver Jones, or that guy will be, they'll look at that guy as a starter over you. So, man, that shooting guard position, and Tahad's going to be fascinating. Just his size, you look at him and think point guard.
Right.
But he can just score. He can just fill it up. He knows how to score. He can shoot. He can drive. I don't know who to compare him to. I don't know that. I guess there's some Jared in him. Like Jared was small, but Jared could shoot. He could drive. He was super athletic. He was tough. Todd's better than that. I'm just saying, like, there's times where you looked at Jared and then you pop up and Jared could have been a more prolific scorer on a team maybe with less weapons. But Tahad's going to be really interesting to see how he fits into everything. And sort of, I mean, he's going to be a guy that, man, some of the looks he's going to get, if you play inside out, if it goes to Janai and comes out, if it goes to Chaney and comes out, if JP Pegues is breaking things down off the dribble, off a ball screen, and then he can kick to Tahad. Like Tahad, I think is going to get some really good looks from three. And I think it's going to be dangerous from out there. But that position, man, that position is as loaded as it's been. And Bruce, you just have not had the quantity of pretty good players at that position under Bruce Pearl. I mean, you got three, I think that could be fantastic.
Right. And I think the only year you can probably compare it would be that 2018, 2019 team where you had Samir kind of coming off the bench behind Malik Dunbar and Bryce Brown. Yeah. And he was they'll use Miles Kelly in a similar way this year, but you didn't have a Tahad Pettiford behind him, on that team. That's the difference. That's what you're talking about as far as the depth goes, is that you just have so many different layers to this team. And I think that might be why. I don't know that it'll be Bruce's best team, but it may be his deepest team 1 through 11. When you look at when we go back and we analyze what this next season is going to be, this may end up being his deepest team. I don't know that it is right now, but I think it's in the discussion to potentially be for sure.
So I wrote when I sort of did my thoughts on the roster after Miles Kelly committed, my projected starter was Denver Jones, but I said Jones/Kelly, meaning I'm giving Jones the nod there, but absolutely don't count out Miles Kelly there. Is that kind of how you would see it as well? Like, are you with me that Miles Kelly is a threat at that position? I mean, don't just bank on Denver necessarily starting. I think it's fairly likely, highly likely, maybe, but Miles Kelly's not a slouch. Like he's going to push both of those positions.
100%. I mean, he's coming into play. Yeah. And I think all of those guys, and when I say that, I mean, we're going to talk about the three next, but Chad Baker-Mazara, Denver, Miles Kelly, they're all going to get 20 minutes a game, I think. I mean, and these guys are coming in to play and compete against one another. And the way Bruce juggles that will be interesting. But no, absolutely. I believe that Miles Kelly can push at both of those positions. I don't think either one of those is solidified as just like when you're looking at it and you say, hey, they're the starter, no question about it. Well, I mean, yes, you would default to them because they're the incumbent, right?
Yeah.
But Miles Kelly in his own right is a very good basketball player, and Bruce wouldn't have brought him in if he didn't think he could be competitive and to push those guys and to potentially start. I mean, I honestly believe he brought in a guy that he thinks is capable, that he believes is capable of starting at either one of those two spots. And the luxury is, if you have an injury to one of those guys this year, you've got a very capable veteran to come off the bench if he doesn't start. So you just have that layer of depth that it's just really hard to acquire in today's, transfer poor world, where if you're not playing, you're gone. And that's not what this team is. I mean, it is a championship all-in type year. And, you just have to applaud Bruce for being able to get a guy, like Miles Kelly and sell him on a plan where it wasn't clear that he was going to be the starter. But I am going to give you that opportunity to compete, to be the starter. And then we'll see how we can fit you in.
Pretty impressive. And that's one of the things, and we can talk a little bit portal in the back end or whatever, but I told our board, like after they got Pegues, I said, listen, these next two positions are going to be hard because Auburn's got players at the next two positions they're trying to fill, and trying to get a guy out of the portal to compete for playing time is not easy. You're talking about a guy leaving a situation, looking for an opportunity to then go compete again. Like all these dudes in the portal want to start and they want big NILs. And so to get a guy knowing he's absolutely could not start is not easy at all. And I understand some teams do it. I get it. Some teams, but it's a combination of factors. Maybe they tossed out a high NIL. Maybe they like whatever. Who knows what's going on? I'm just telling you, it's not always an easy. It's not always an easy situation. All right, let's talk three. You talked about it. Dude, there's like 5 guys at this position. I mean, you've got Chad Baker-Mazara coming back.
Yep.
You've got Miles Kelly, who will compete at the 3 as well. You've got Chris Moore coming back, who I get it. He's not the most talented player in the world. I get it. But Chris Moore, there's nothing he doesn't know about the system offensively and defensively. Nothing he's not going to know. And you saw, look, after Leroy Berman's injury, when there was pressure put on Moore, like, listen, like take advantage of the opportunity here. He stepped it up and he made plays. I mean, you can go back and watch that Florida game, that championship game. He made winning plays in the second half of that game. He made plays that impacted the game. Okay. So Chris Moore is coming back. Then you got Ja'Kai Howard, who is all kinds of athletic. But again, no pressure on him. Almost a perfect situation, by the way, for Ja'Kai Howard. He's got 3 guys ahead of him that could all be gone next year. I mean, he could learn, develop, play, no pressure, and just step right into it next year. He's got a fantastic opportunity. Then you've got Chaney, who is a 4, but Bruce said the other day, can he play some big 3? And I think that will probably be something that will be limited. It'll depend on the rotations. Like maybe there's a rotation where they need him to play a little bit of 3. Maybe, who knows? Maybe they have a lineup one time where it's Dylan at the 5, Janai at the 4, and Chaney at the 3 for 3 or 4 minutes. So it won't be something that Chaney's going to be. He's not going to ask him to play a ton of 3, but if he can add that to his repertoire, if he can give him a little bit there, it gives him another option. So you've got 5 options there. Really, I would say 4 are like primary 3s, and then Chaney's a primary 4. Here's what I'll say. Again, Kelly, it's going to be interesting to see how he competes at the 2 and the 3. And I'm curious, by the way, in the offseason, if it makes me think of sort of like offensive lineman, you guy that he could play guard, he could play tackle. At some point, do you make the call and go, we think he's a tackle, get him tackle reps? I'm curious, Miles Kelly, like you sort of learn everything, but it does help to be at a position. I'm sort of curious, Miles Kelly, in the offseason, is there a point where they go, like, okay, you're a 3. Okay, you're a 2. Like, we'll cross-train you, but, like, let's get you – maybe let's sort of start to veer to settling you in at 1. But listen, I'll say this. Chad Baker-Mazara was one of Auburn's 3 most valuable players last year, statistically speaking. Janai Brim, Jalen Williams, Chad. He scored, assists, rebounds. Chad, his plus-minus was the best on the team over the course of the season. He was a catalyst. Chad also, as we know, had some issues on the court, emotional issues and outbursts and some technicals, and including the Yale game, which we don't even have to go over. We all know what happened, and he's got to fix that. That's a legitimate thing, the same way as maybe he was somebody being turnover prone. Like, he needs to improve on that. He can't do that again. And I'll also just say, I think there's an overall maturity thing with Chad that needs to get better. That's what I'll say. I think he's a fantastic player. I think Chad's a good guy. Likes to smile, but there's a maturity thing with Chad that's got to improve on. And so anybody who thinks Chad is the surefire starter next year, I said it on the board and I'll just say it again only because I just want you to be informed. I wouldn't hold fast to that belief. He absolutely could be the starter. But if you're just like, well, Chad's going to start, no questions asked, and then Miles Kelly's going to back him up, I would say that you're incorrect at this point. Chad's going to have to work hard and fight for his spot there. And Miles Kelly's part of that, and Chad battling himself is part of that. What do you make of that position? You toss in Chris Moore. Last year you had Chris Moore started a bunch of games, right? And then Chad, that was really kind of what you had at the three, right? Chris, and you had Lior coming off the bench too. It's definitely, again, like the two, it's a much deeper position this year. You got more options. Could Ja'Kai come in and barely play? Is Chris Moore potentially the guy that you say, well, Ja'Kai's our freshman. He needs to play, but Chris Moore is a veteran. Who of those two? I feel like one of those two is going to sort of be struggling a little bit. Do you think it's the freshman that sits more, or does the more athletic Howard pass more and Chris Moore is the guy who sits more? What do you make of the three position, which is tons of flexibility, but a lot to figure out?
Well, first of all, and you hit on this earlier, I think Bruce prides himself on positionless basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to slide guys in and out of spots. And you have a lot of that at this position where you have Miles Kelly who can play 2-3. Chad against probably smaller teams could play some 3-4. Simo can play 3-4. I'm not exactly sure what Ja'Kai Howard's going to be able to do at this point. If he can play the 4 or not. I think he's done some of that for Overtime Elite, but predominantly he's a wing. Maybe he's a 2-3. I'm not exactly sure what his position is going to be, but a lot of flexibility with that position, but definite upgrade. You are significantly deeper than you were this time last year. And that's not me in any way trying to be demeaning towards, a guy in Lior Berman who 100% earned his stripes and was playing some really good basketball down the stretch until he got injured. Like, that was kind of a shame, but that also gave the ability for, Simo to elevate his game. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be interesting to me. It probably, who gets minutes there is what happens with Jaheim Hudson. Is he the player that Bruce thinks he's going to be? Because if he's not, then that's where Simo goes as a backup to Chaney Johnson. So that will probably drive a little bit of who plays at that position. And then it's just going to be a brutal battle when they get into, their fall, off-season program, and these guys are going at it all summer long, all fall long. It's going to be nothing short of separating the men from the boys. You know what I mean? Like, it is a real competition, Justin. So I don't envy the people that are having to make decisions about who's going to be playing. It's definitely going to be better. And I'm with you that you cannot bank on the fact that Chad Baker-Mazara is going to be the absolute starter. Just like Denver, you cannot bank on the fact you would default to them. They're the incumbent. They earned their stripes this time last year, and I think they're going to get the first shot at it. But again, Miles Kelly's coming into play. And so long as he comes in with the right mindset and he attacks it and he's willing to buy into the type of basketball, that the brand that Auburn wants to play, and picks up the scheme relatively quickly, there's nothing that's going to prohibit him, from not getting on the court in some capacity. And then what does he do? Does he have meaningful minutes? Or is he inefficient? So that's going to be where they're going to drive that, because what Chad had working for him that I thought was his best asset was A, he was a creator and a facilitator for other players, and 2, he was efficient with his opportunities. Minus, like you said, some of the maturity issues on the court, and that has got to change. If he's got pro aspirations and ambitions, he's got to be able to kind of shake through some of, putting the hands behind your back and some of the other things that we saw on the court where he was kind of showing some immaturity somewhat. And that's not me trying to attack him as a player. I think he's a really friendly kid. I think he gets along. He gels well with his team. It has nothing to do about his overall demeanor. I think just when he gets into a competition mode, maybe sometimes he doesn't always react the way you want a veteran to react. And I think having a year of going through that and having some examples to be shown to him of hey, this is how we want you to handle it moving forward. That's going to be beneficial for him. And then having a guy like Miles Kelly that's coming in that's been a featured player before someplace else, and he's pushing you for your spot. Well, that's going to make the cream rise to the top. So I'm excited to watch the battle at this position. But just like the two, yes, I think we've improved at 3 position. How much so will be dictated by how quickly Miles Kelly picks up the scheme, and then how do they find roles for certain guys? Is it a combination of roles? Do they find them solid minutes at one position? I think it's going to be the former, but we'll see. Justin, it's going to be really interesting. It truly is.
Yeah, and you make a good point about Chris. He could certainly – he's physical enough to bang a little bit at the 4 if you need. Didn't have the height necessarily, maybe you want, but he could bang there a little bit. Miles Kelly, 14 points a game last year, a little over 14 as a sophomore at Georgia Tech. He shot 37% from the field, 32% from 3. Yeah, so Miles Kelly is interesting. He had some really impressive games, right? So he scored 36 at Louisville last year. He scored 30 at Syracuse. He's got 15 career games with 20 or more points. He's got 2 30-point games. Like Pegues, he's got 95 games under his belt at Georgia Tech. He made 3 or more threes in 34 of his 95 games. So 1 out of 3, he's hitting at least 3 threes. He had 4 more rebounds in 39 of those games, and he had 12 games of 7 or more rebounds. So, he's capable of scoring. He's capable of shooting from deep, and he had a couple games of double-digit rebounds as a 6'6" guard. In their wins last year, he averaged nearly 16 points and 6 boards while shooting almost 40% from 3. And even going back and looking, he's got games in his career of 7 threes, 7 threes, 6 threes, 6 threes, 5. But what's crazy is then you look and if you went to the bottom, he's got a handful of games where he completely disappeared. Mm-hmm. Some of those were freshman year, but some of them were this past year where you're he's capable of this. But if you go back and look last year, there's games last year where he was 0 points, 0 for 3. And you're like, hold on, what is happening? How are you going for 30 and you're the best player on the team? What's happening in this game where you have 0? So I don't know. I didn't watch him. Maybe he was banged up. Maybe I don't know. But it was odd to me. So he's a fantastic player. That's probably the most curious thing about is what were those games with 0 points about? Is he a guy that just gets passive sometimes? I don't know. I'm curious to watch him play. What I love about him is his demeanor. He's a guy that's going to graduate early from Georgia Tech. He's on pace. I told our board one of the ways Auburn recruited him, from what I understand, is he wants to graduate from Georgia Tech. That's why going back to Georgia Tech was a possibility for him. And so I don't know that it's all done yet, but one of the things Auburn was trying to do was figure out a way for him to take classes at Auburn, transfer them back to Georgia Tech so he can finish there in December. But some of the guy graduate early from Georgia Tech, smart, good kid that's going to push Chad in the right ways. He's going to push Denver to get better, and he's going to push Chad not only to get better, but he's going to push Chad to do everything he's being asked to do on and off the court. But he's not really a ball. He can handle the ball, but somebody asked me, could he be an emergency backup point guard? Emergency. It's not where you want him to be. But no. If everybody was hurt, could he do it? And I don't think Auburn would be horrific if that had to happen. But he's a really good catch and shoot guy. He's not great at off the dribble shooting a 3. He can take you to the basket, but he's very good. Maybe one dribble or coming off a screen and catching and shoot from 3. Some of the shots from 3 last year were deep. He hit some 3s last year that were NBA range. So really interesting pickup. And he's a guy, by the way, that didn't even visit. He visited in high school. One of the things when I first heard his name, I said, "Does he need a visit?" They were like, "No, he's been here already. There's no need." So they did a great job. I think as of when people will listen to this, I don't think he's withdrawn his name officially, but like I told people, I think he had one more workout he was going to go through, but absolutely all the expectation is he'll pull his name out and sign and all that. But think about, man, if Chad steps up to the plate does everything he's being asked to do to become a better person, better player, more reliable player. And that's your options at the 3. Like, let's just say Miles Kelly started. You saw what Chad did off the bench last year. I mean, imagine if your second rotation of your first 3 guys is, let's say JP starts, and then let's say Denver slides over and takes a rotation when JP goes out. Your second 3 could be Denver. It could be Denver, Miles Kelly, Chad. It could be Denver, Tahad, Chad, Denver, Tahad, Miles. Like it could be your second group of guards, man. There's so much flexibility in those 3 positions on what that could look like. You could start Miles at the 2 and start JP at the 1, and then Denver slides in at the 1 and then could slide over to the 2. Like there's just so much you can do with those 3 positions. Bring Jakai in there as well, but a lot of versatility there. But I'm curious to see sort of how Miles pushes Chad and how Chad responds.
Justin, positionless basketball, it just you've got an embarrassment of riches like we've talked about. And it just really is a very deep position. That and the 2, those are where you're going to have real wars for those minutes. And I'm just excited to see how it all comes together. I really am, man, because those are the 2 deepest positions on this team. And probably if this isn't the deepest ball club, those are the 2 deepest positions that Bruce has ever had in his tenure at Auburn. I can't speak to Tennessee, but during his tenure at Auburn, I think these are easily the 2 deepest spots he's ever had.
This probably looks as much like one of those Tennessee teams as he's had. Like you think back to those Tennessee teams, they never had a true center, but man, they had a bunch of dudes who were 6'6", or 6'8". And I could go. I mean, I'm thinking about teams, whether it's like Ron Slay or the guy that played in the NBA forever, Tobias Harris, right?
Yes.
I don't know. But that was kind of their deal. This team will look, when you bring back Chad, you toss in a Miles Kelly, you toss in a Jaheim Hudson. It'll look more like that. All right, let's talk about the 4 and 5. You bring Jaheim Hudson in from SMU, who's statistically wise, right? I get it. You look at him and you go like 5 points, a couple rebounds, played about 15 minutes a game. But I think here's the deal with the addition of Jaheim Hudson, right? Auburn went after RJ Godfrey from Clemson, but that was going to be tough. One, because Godfrey's dad played at Georgia. I think he was always pining for the way to get into Georgia. And then RJ Godfrey's a pretty talented kid. Like, he's probably going to be a starter. And so that was going to be a tough one NIL-wise, which, again, Auburn's got a lot of resources devoted to the roster. Toss in JP Pegues. Did they have enough to make some things happen? Yeah, it's like they were broke. I'm saying that. But when you get towards the end, you got to be smart about some stuff. And tossing out a huge bag for RJ Godfrey or a huge bag for Dylan Mitchell, they weren't on board with that. When you've got Chaney coming back, like neither of those guys are just surefire studs. RJ Godfrey didn't start last year. Dylan Mitchell started and is a good defender and good athlete, but didn't really have any offensive game at all. He didn't stretch the floor at all. The thought of Dylan Mitchell from Texas on the floor with Dylan Cardwell, by the way, would be like they're just both going to stand under the basket. So like there's good things about him, but I'm just both those guys. So what I'm saying is Jaheim Hudson, I think, fit a lot of things. He can stretch the floor. He has got the ability to shoot from the outside. Didn't do it a lot. It's not necessarily his game, but if you go watch film, you go work on that for an offseason, he's a threat to do it. Like, you got to at least respect it. So I think he's got ability to stretch a little bit. He's a hard worker. He's not going to come in entitled because he didn't come from a big school. He didn't have a million offers. So I think it's similar to how Chaney came in. I think you can get a hard worker. And NIL did play a factor. RJ Godfrey was sort of a different deal. Georgia stepped up. When he was going to visit Auburn, Georgia stepped up and said, okay, let's give him the NIL bag. And hey, by the way, if we're going to do this, you're not visiting Auburn. And that's what happened. They came in the day before and said, all right, we'll meet we'll give you what you want, but if we do, you're not going on this visit tomorrow to Auburn. And he said, okay. Dylan Mitchell obviously visited, loved it, but I told people from the start, Auburn's not going to be his top NIL offer. It's probably going to be his lowest. Cincinnati was up there, some other schools. And so, he went with the NIL bag at Cincinnati. And again, more of a surefire starter on top of that. So they settle. I say they settle on Jaheim Hudson, but it's one of those things, man, where we could look back and you could go, it worked out perfectly. Fit, like what he brings to the table. There's a lot of things that could go on where you could look at it and go, looking back, boy, he turns out that's exactly how it needed to work out. So is Jaheim Hudson the most sexy guy that they got in the portal? No, he's not. Is he a prolific scorer? No, but here's the thing. He doesn't need to be. On this Auburn team coming back, you've got Janai, you're going to have JP, you're going to have Dylan, you're going to have Chad, you're going to have Miles Kelly, you're going to have, Todd, where would Jaheim even Chaney? They're going to be like maybe 5 or 6 in terms of the scoring threat. Like it's not what you need from him. So I think Jaheim coming in is an interesting player who's going to push Chaney and be a hard worker. And for Chaney, man, if he can just continue his ascent, especially the last handful of games, 7 or 8 games for Chaney were really good. If he can continue that trajectory, like the how much better he got within the season, man, he could shock a lot of people of how good he's going to be next year. That position's fantastic. Janai could play a little 4. I've talked about that. That's more of trying to give Janai opportunities to stretch his game and just do a little power forward work. And you've got a center in Dylan who you would like to play a little more minutes to. I think those will be limited situations, but there will definitely be some Dylan at the 5, Janai at the 4. But for the most part, it'll be Chaney, Jaheim, a little bit of Janai sprinkled in there. But what do you make of the 3? How good can Chaney be? Can Jaheim push Chaney? Do you think that's even possible? And like how do you sort of see that? I guess Chaney could play it, and if Chaney goes to the 3, what happens? But what do you make of Jaheim? And really, like, is Chaney might be the X factor on this team. Like he might be if you had to pick one thing, like the one thing that could be the biggest variable, the biggest up and down, it might be Chaney.
And I said that the other night on the call-in show with Cole and Jeffrey, that essentially the growth and development of Chaney Johnson is really going to kind of drive the ceiling of this basketball team. Because if he can be, a double-digit scorer and, 7+ rebounds a night from that position, and the way he played the second half and still had to split minutes with Jalen, I mean, it wasn't like he was getting – when he got significant minutes in the 1 or 2 games that Jalen was still out, I think he had a 14.8 rebound production type game against Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, am I expecting to get that every night from Chaney Johnson? No, but the athleticism is through the roof. And if the development continues to come and he continues to be able to learn to find his role, and I think that's where he struggled mostly, because he went from being a featured scorer at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, to being a guy that was more of a role player that was just supposed to come in and give some quality minutes, fit in defensively. That was a real change for him. So now continuing to find his position and defining that and the way he's going to be featured is extremely important. And it sets the ceiling for what this team can be. Jaheim Hudson, I love the fit. I do. I went back and watched his tape at Georgia State. I didn't watch so much of what he did at SMU, minus the Indiana State game. And that's probably not fair. I cherry-picked his best game and watched that. But I saw a guy that was very active, a willing defender. You talked about that before. They're not going to take guys that aren't willing defenders. He's a willing defender and rebounder, first and foremost. So he's going to give you that consistently each and every night. But a guy that gives you some range, gives you some flexibility for how you play him in certain sets. And so I like that fit. Is he going to be a superstar? No, I don't think so. But I'll be honest with you, Justin, it won't be the first time that Bruce took a guy that was a flyer for some of the fan base. Like, think about Javon McCormick. I mean, he was a last-second ad from junior college that really only had one other team that was after him, and I can't even remember who that was right now on this podcast. But a guy that, was a last-second addition to fill in for Davion Mitchell transferring to Baylor. And he ended up being one of the more productive players that Bruce has ever recruited at that position. So can they find the right fit with Jaheim? I think they may have done that. It'll be interesting to see. You'll see early signs from him. And can he play at this level? I think he can. And you're right that he's not going to be asked to carry this team. You're looking for 10, 12 minutes a night from him, maybe 15 minutes a night from him. But if you're going to give some rotation to Janai at that position, then you're really kind of decreasing what you're looking for from that position. So if you give him an extra 5 minutes a night at the 4 spot, finding a guy to fill that role, I think Jaheim Hudson's kind of perfect for that. And again, he complements Chaney. He complements Janai. He's not going to be a guy that's going to come in and, turn over the apple cart, be a distraction in the locker room. And he's another kid from Georgia that watched Auburn on this rise underneath Bruce Pearl and wanted to be a part of it. And I think that's a huge piece when you are trying to play championship basketball. You want guys who are going to be willing to fit into roles and guys that want to be a part of your program. And Jaheim Hudson is one of those guys. And we'll just see how it goes. But again, you're right, man. What happens with Chaney Johnson? And is he the player that was in those last 8 games? Because if he's that guy, this team has, elite 8 type capability, maybe Final Four type capability. If he's not that guy, then maybe we're talking about something a little bit less than that. So that'll be the interesting piece, man, is how does that come together? I think it can come together really well. Don't know that, but I'll be interested to discuss it with you when we get to that. So when we get to the season, that's for certain.
Yeah, I was looking up real quick. By the way, it's funny. So JP Pegues is from Nashville, but here we are again in the portal, and we're like, oh, gee, they got a kid from SMU and Georgia Tech. Jaheim Hudson is from Marietta, Georgia.
Yeah.
Miles Kelly's from Parkview. And go back to last year, right? Chaney Johnson's obviously from Alabama, Huntsville, and then Denver, who obviously was at FIU, from Huntsville. It's just funny how the last 2 years, his portal additions have been from, you say, oh, you got it from SMU. Well, no, the kid's from Atlanta. You know what I mean? It's like, so 2 of the portal guys are right there from Georgia, a Georgia pipeline again. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that Bruce talked about with Jaheim, and by the way, I want to add when I was talking about sort of the dynamic of the Jaheim's recruitment, remember, I put Jaheim's name on the board on the corner. I mean,
early.
Maybe early, before I put Dylan Mitchell's name on the board. And I mean, before basically the same time I put RJ Godfrey probably. So this is not, it's not a guy that like, oh, they missed on him and they missed on him. And then, all right, they found Jaheim and they took Jaheim. No. Jaheim was like targeted and he was a name I heard very early on. So like he was in the mix with all these guys. And in terms of the combination of what you're looking for and how it might work, he ends up on Auburn's roster. So just keep that into perspective. One of the things Bruce talked about was, he said, I talked to all his coaches. They all talked about how great of a teammate he is, which Billy Embody, who if you read on auburnlive.com, Billy Embody works for On3, covered Hudson at SMU and said kind of the same thing. Hard worker, character, versatile player, nicknamed Turtle. I was trying to find Jaheim's Jaheim says, 5.5, 3.5, 18 steals, 17 blocks. Had the good game against Indiana State where he had 21 in the NIT loss there. At Georgia State, he averaged again basically 5 and 5. I think the interesting thing about, I think it's Chaney's job certainly to lose, and Jaheim's going to want to come in and start, but I think Chaney is such an athlete. The thing that Bruce talked about with Chaney was turnovers. You go back and look, he was basically 1 for 1 assist and turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
He was of the main players, he had the worst assist rate and one of the worst turnover rates. Like that's where Chaney needs to get better. If he's going to be in there and be that guy, think about how good Jalen was with the ball. Think about how good Jalen was as a passer. That's one area where Chaney's got to get better. He's got to become a player that when he gets the ball can find Janai, can kick it out, can be a guy that you trust with the ball, handling the ball, taking a dribble or two, making the right pass, not getting himself in trouble or getting it swiped or whatever. So that's a thing Chaney's going to have to really work on. But man, I mean, if he continue, you just started to see that Georgia game. You're like pull up jumper from the elbow. Florida game, back you down, fade away. I mean, he showed some things that you're like, whoa. I mean, he showed some legitimate post moves, some legitimate mid-range game in his repertoire. And man, if he can build on that, that's strong. And then, I'm curious to see, what Janai does at that position or how much they do Janai at the 4. I think it'll be somewhat limited, but I agree, man. I think Chaney's like, is just a massive X factor. I guess there's more. I feel like there's maybe a bigger range of where Chaney could be, maybe more than anybody else. You know what I'm saying? Like I think Chaney's floor and his ceiling that's probably a bigger gap than Janai. It's a bigger gap than Dylan. It's a bigger gap than JP Pegues, than Denver, than Chad, than Miles. Like outside of the freshmen coming in, and even them, I don't know what their ceiling is as freshmen. So like Chaney's, to me, his floor and ceiling is just the biggest gap of where does he go and how much better he can be. And then of course there is some pressure. Jaheim's a good player, but Jaheim's not Miles Kelly. Like, so if Chaney isn't what he needs to be, Jaheim's certainly not bad, but Jaheim hasn't shown necessarily ability to be a massive scoring threat. I think so there's, so yeah, a lot of pressure on Chaney, I think, to be really good this offseason. And then, I mean, look, and then you talk about the five. I mean, not much to talk about there. I mean, you got Dylan and Janai coming back. They were fantastic last year. No reason Janai shouldn't be better this year. At least a tick. I mean, maybe his 3-point shooting, maybe he takes a few more there, but he was so good. I'm curious to see if teams have seen enough of Janai. Is there anything they can do scouting wise? I mean, he's now 2 seasons in at Auburn. He's not the most athletic guy, but he's so crafty, so smart that he just finds a way to sort of get those shots off and play down low. I would say the one thing that'll be interesting that for Auburn is be really prepared for double teams.
Sure.
When teams sort of double Janai a little bit, okay, he's got to be ready to dribble it out, back it out, make the right pass, that kind of stuff, because you've got to figure teams are going to do more of that. So just being more prepared, and that could hurt Janai's production. Maybe teams try to double him a little bit more, and it could hurt his production a little bit. But now, boy, I mean, double him, okay. But if Chaney gets better and he's passing out to the wing to Miles Kelly or Chad Baker or JP Pegues or Denver Jones or something like that, there's some weapons out there. So that's a dangerous game. And then Dylan, I think, just wants to be in Auburn forever, apparently. It's just so, I mean, he'll be him. He'll be defense, rebounding, block shots. He'll be Dylan. He's going to get a few more minutes this year. I mean, that's one of the things they told him. Hey, if you come back, and it was important, by the way, to get him back. It wasn't Dylan likes Auburn, but it was important for Auburn to secure him and to get him back. They understand the importance of having Dylan coming off the bench as an athletic center the way he is. But one of the things they talked about was trying to get him a few more minutes and trying to get Janai a few more minutes at the 4. That's why I talk about those things, because I think those are two things that are important to the players. But the front line wasn't really the issue last year with Auburn. The center position, I think, like you said, the 4 is probably the only position where you would say from last year to this year is a step backwards. And I don't want to have some massive negative connotation, but Jalen was awesome last year.
Sure.
Chaney's not there yet. Now, and I thought by the end of the year, that Chaney is that Chaney at the end of the year probably a little better than Jaheim Hudson, maybe right now. So like I just think by the end of the year, that combo is better than this combo. But this combo could get there. I mean, Chaney could get better, Jaheim could get better, and it could be not far off. But I think that's the only position, that 4, that's a step backwards. It's not a liability this year, but it's not maybe quite as good as it was last year, obviously, because you can't replace Jalen and the amount of games he played and the versatility he brought to the table. Not right off the bat anyway.
No, but you can do it in different ways. You can manufacture points from different positions. And so that's what we just talked about. You improved greatly as far as a scoring position is concerned at the point guard position. You went from 2 guys that, weren't double-digit scorers to a guy that's scored 18 points and averaged 5 assists a game. Now, is he going to do that in the SEC? I don't know, but I know he's going to be an uptick from what was provided before. So that gives you some production back from that position. And then you talk about a guy at a minimum who's coming off the bench in Miles Kelly, who could potentially be another double-digit scorer for you. So you're bringing points from different positions. So you don't absolutely have to have the same production from the 4 position. You just can't be a liability, and you want somebody that's going to be an active defender, rebounder, team player, and a guy that can make you pay. If you're double down completely on Janai and you're forcing him to give the ball up, do you have a 4 position that can also command some attention, that can free up those floor spacers that you've added? Because if, like you said, if you reverse the basketball and kick it out, and you've got Miles Kelly on the wings standing there for that wide open corner three that we used to see Bruce get all the time for Bryce all the time. Hey man, we'll take that all night long. So like you said, can Chaney be like, like Jalen last year, like Chuma was at that 4 position that just had the ability to find the open guy? Can he be a step above of what you got from Anthony McLemore and, Horace Spencer at that position? Because that's what he's got to have to be. He can't be those guys. He's got to be a tick above that. Doesn't necessarily have to be Jalen or Chuma, or even one of the best basketball players probably in Auburn's history. So he just needs to be probably an 8 to 9 point a night type scorer. Get you 6 to 7 rebounds a night and be a real contributor. And like you said, a guy that's not a liability, Justin. Be consistent and be, productive in the option and the opportunities that you're provided. But I thought you raised an interesting question with people really starting to double Janai. I think you're going to see that early. But if Auburn's able to make people pay on the perimeter the way I think they're going to be able to, they're not going to be able to sit in that because, as Bruce is famous for saying, 3 counts more than 2. So you want to play that game? Go right ahead, okay? And we'll have fun shooting from 3 all night long if you're going to pack the lane that way. So it is going to be an interesting adjustment for Janai, and I do think giving him some rotational minutes at the 4 position makes a lot of sense for him, specifically as it pertains to his pro aspirations. And then it also gives you some different looks that you're probably not as prepared for. It allows Bruce to put in some offensive sets and Mike Burgermaster to get creative. A guy that doesn't get enough credit for some of the things he comes up with on the offensive end, but a guy that is going to have a lot of tools in his tool bag this year. And I'm interested to see what Burgermaster comes up with and, how Bruce kind of puts it all together in the sets that he calls night in, night out for this team that I think is going to be really offensively diverse. And a team that just very talented top to bottom, Justin.
Preseason, I would think preseason number 2 in the SEC. Assuming Mark Sears comes back, they'll be 1. Bama will be 1, and I don't see why Auburn's not 2. I mean, Arkansas obviously will be talented, but they're not. I mean, some of those are true freshmen. It's going to be like a Kentucky team. I don't even know what their total numbers are going to be, but they'll have some. They got Janelle Davis, right, from Florida Atlantic, so that's big. But still, some of those are true freshmen. I don't see how you could pick. There's no way. I don't see how you could pick them preseason ahead of what Auburn's bringing back. I think it'll be Alabama 1, Auburn 2. And there'll be some good teams. But there could be more difference this year than in the past few years. I feel like it's been 4 or 5 teams that's like this year, Alabama, Auburn, Arkansas, talent. But, no, Mississippi State better.
Yep.
Georgia better. But Florida better. Tennessee landed Chaz Lanier, big one, but I could see more gap between Alabama and Auburn. If you want to toss Arkansas in there, something like that, then where in the past few years, I feel like Bama, Auburn, Kentucky, Tennessee, like take your pick. Like I felt like I don't know that you're going to have 4 like that. I think Alabama and Auburn are still there, but I don't know. I mean, Tennessee will still be really good, but it'll be interesting. I think they're going to be clearly the best 2 teams in the league. All right, so let's end on this. 27-8 is what Auburn went last year. 13-5. We don't know the whole schedule. It's gonna be a tougher non-conference schedule. There's gonna be some legit non-conference games in there that'll be interesting to see how things go. So Auburn. Of course they lost. That means they lost 3 non-conference last year. App State, I can't remember them. App State, Baylor, and who's the other one they lost? App State, Baylor, and
they didn't. Those were the only 2 non-conference games they lost.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right. Absolutely, yeah. The way this schedule's shaping up could easily, they could lose 3 for sure, and it wouldn't even be if they get some of these games done. They could lose 3, and it wouldn't even be that big a deal. They're gonna have some really nice wins too if that's all they lose. So, is this a team can reach 30? It's hard to predict. They had 3 scores in double digits last year. Is that gonna be 4 this year? 13-5 in the league. Is it too early to predict? Maybe. Is it a tick up from 27 games? Can they get to 14-4 in league play? Is it 15-3 in league play? What do you think?
I think it's too early to say, but I do think so. I think things are going to be reversed. I think, like you talked about, the caliber of team that Auburn is going to play in their non-con schedule is going to be insane. I mean, you're talking about potentially a Purdue. That field in Maui is going to be absolutely just bonkers, man. With UConn, I think Duke is also in that mix, correct? There's a lot of talented teams that are going to be
UConn, North Carolina, Michigan State, Memphis, Dayton, Iowa State, Colorado, Auburn. So like you're guaranteed 3. So you have to think one of those is North Carolina or UConn. You got to
Right.
figure one of those is going to be those. So then your other 2 are, I mean, Iowa State, right? Like fantastic. Memphis, like they'll be pretty talented. I don't know where they'll be. Colorado, not bad. Dayton,
Yeah.
not bad. Michigan State, not bad. Yeah.
Right. Not bad at all. I think Michigan State and Colorado were both, postseason teams last year that were in the tournament and got wins in the tournament. So that field is absolutely loaded. You're right. Memphis is probably the weakest of that group. I don't think Memphis made the NCAA tournament, and if they did, they didn't get very far. But Penny always recruits extremely well there, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of compilation of talent he can put together. But then the other teams that Bruce is talking about adding, and then who are you going to get in the SEC ACC Challenge? That's going to be interesting to see who you pull from that standpoint. So I think there's the real potential that the non-con is going to be, you're not going to walk away with just 2 losses. I think you're probably looking at 3 or 4 in the non-con potentially. And then you're right, the talent gap in the SEC, I think probably your best 3 coming back. God, it's going to be Auburn. It's going to be Alabama, Auburn. Do you think it's Arkansas or Florida? Because Florida was a really talented team at the end of last year, and I think they got a big returnee. Didn't the white kid just or Clayton?
Clayton's coming back. The big guy that got hurt against Auburn is sitting out the whole year. He's redshirting a year, so unfortunately, Logden, was it right?
Yeah,
he's sitting out. They Riley Kugel left, went to Mississippi State.
That's true.
And I'd have to look and see who else Florida landed into the portal, but they'll be pretty good. In Tennessee, I think is overgoing a little bit of an overhaul, but Chaz Lanier was one of the best players in the portal, so they'll have some ability. But I feel like Auburn and Alabama, just in terms of not just landing some important portal pieces, but a bunch of important guys coming back. Like I just think those are going to be the clear 2 best teams when you combine talent and experience and veteran players. Like I think they're going to be clearly the best 2 teams.
Agreed.
Like I think 13-5. Like if I'm Auburn, 13-5 is the floor in conference play to me. I mean, you're bringing back what you're bringing back, and your struggle last year was more guard, and you got a veteran guard, and you brought in Miles Kelly and all your front line. I mean, Chaney's got to come on, but boy, I mean, 13-5 is the floor. I mean, if this team went 12-6, you'd go good, pretty good. You'd go pretty good. Nothing wrong, nothing to hang your head about.
Right.
12-6 in league play, but you wouldn't go really nice year. I mean, really exceeded expectations. Like, you'd be like pretty good with this team. You'd say that's pretty good. You wouldn't be like that's really good or even great.
No, I agree. I think that's very fair, Justin. So probably the floor for me would be 12-6, and maybe the ceiling is 15-3. Not knowing who you're going to be matched up against and how those, is anybody going to get injured or something of that nature. But I think you talked about it, the retention, those veteran guys that know Bruce's system, know how to play in the SEC. You're talking about Chad Baker-Mazzaro, who's got a full year worth of league experience now. How much better is he going to be? Chaney Johnson, how much better can he be from this point last year? I mean, he was like a sponge last year, where you talk about game 1 to the end of the season, where he was at, it was a quantum leap. And can he do that again in the offseason? Denver Jones, another guy that made a quantum leap from the time the season started to the end. And then like you talked about, the X factors are going to be certainly, what is the ascension of JP Pegues? How quickly can he get to playing at his top end? Miles Kelly, how does he mix in? And then Chaney Johnson. And if those are all net positive for Auburn, it's going to be hard to argue against 15-3 in conference play. I mean, it just judging by what you're looking. And where's Kentucky in all this? That's a team that you've consistently.
True. Yeah.
that you've consistently had to worry about. And I just don't know what to expect from them without John Calipari there. The dearth of talent that kind of they were left with, or what walked out the door and joined him in Arkansas, and then how does all that mesh there in Fayetteville? Man, it is going to be an interesting year. And I tell you one that I've been watching and paying attention to, year 2 of Chris Beard at Ole Miss. They've added a lot in the portal. I'll be interested to see how that one comes together, because that's one I'm kind of tracking that I think maybe has the potential to be like a South Carolina this time last year, a team that's potentially better than what the expectation would be with them going into the season.
Yeah, that'll be interesting too. And you're right. I totally forgot about Kentucky. I mean, I can't remember. They'll be good, but but they're more of an unknown. I mean, yeah, you look at, I mean, Auburn's SEC opponents, they go to Texas. That'll be tough. I don't know what Texas is going to be. You go to Alabama, to Georgia, to Kentucky, at LSU, at Ole Miss, at South Carolina, at Texas A&M, at Vanderbilt. Obviously you play Alabama home and away, you play Georgia home and away. At Kentucky, you haven't won there in forever, but
No,
not manageable. But I mean, Oklahoma should be pretty deep. Well, they're trying to be decent. I don't know how good they're going to be. That's at home. You get Bama at home. Tennessee, you get at home. Mississippi State, who's going to be better, you get at home. You don't go there. Florida, you don't go there. You get them at home. So some of the teams we're talking about, Florida, you get them once in Neville. Mississippi State once in Neville. Tennessee once in Neville. Bama and Georgia play Arkansas, Neville. So you go to Bama and Georgia, but man, some of those games, some of the better teams in the league, the way it's shaping up, you get Neville and you don't go there. The teams that Auburn travels to are some of the teams that I think are middle to further down. LSU, Ole Miss, South Carolina, A&M's losing a lot, Vanderbilt, and you go to Kentucky. So I'm just saying, all in all, it's not bad. It's gonna be a heck of a home schedule. I mean, you got Bama, Arkansas, Georgia, who's Godfrey's there, Tyron Lawrence is now there. They might not have the depth, but they're gonna be pretty good. Bama, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State all come in to Neville, and those are all easily top quarter teams in the league. So the home schedule, SEC wise, is going to be insanely good. But if you can hold serve, you got a great shot. I think it's not a terrible schedule the way it shapes up at all.
how much more prepared are you playing a non-conference schedule that you're going to play this year by comparison to the non-conference schedule you played this time last year? I just think it's going to really help Auburn down the stretch, probably facing the caliber of team that you're going to see in this non-con, and how you start out SEC play, where I thought Auburn was kind of shaky in certain spots. Obviously they just absolutely blasted Arkansas. You know what I mean? That, they were dialed in for that game. But I felt like there were some shaky moments there early on, specifically like a rocky offensive performance against Texas A&M at home, a couple other games. I think this has an opportunity to have Auburn more prepared and more like that 2018-19 team that really played a difficult non-conference schedule. I mean, I think they drew Duke in Hawaii early on, and then they had some other games that they played where I felt like they were just prepared. They were prepared for that season. They were prepared for the pitfalls of what can happen. And so this is going to have an opportunity for Auburn to have, a landmark type year. It really is. If you are able to be successful in the non-conference and in this schedule, and realistically, how good is the middle? Because
Right.
that is what's going to define how good Auburn can be in the SEC. How good is the middle? And if you're able to hold serve against all of that and still knock off a couple of the top tier teams, you got to really like what this team is going to be looking like from a seed standpoint. And you have a good feeling about it right now. And then we'll see where we are when the season starts.
Yeah. If you're going to go tough non-conference, this is the team to do it with. Yeah. I get why Burgo and Bruce and how Mike Burgomaster, I get why they've sort of scheduled the way they have non-conference for a lot of years, which has been kind of on the line. Can we schedule them they're good enough mid-majors to where a handful of them are going to make the tournament, but they're games where we need to win. We need to win. We don't need to be scheduling like Kansas and Kentucky. We need to schedule pretty tough, but win them. And so like it kind of burned them last year. Indiana should have been better. USC should have been better.
Yeah.
There's some of those games. I don't know who else they played. Notre Dame was always terrible, but there's maybe one other game where I thought that a team maybe should have been better. But last year kind of burned them a little bit, where played a couple teams that should have been better than they were. But if you're gonna schedule hard, this is the year to do it. It's SEC. They didn't play it hard. They went 13-5. It really helps you in the NCAA tournament, where it's like, all right, we've already played 3-4 neutral site games that are tournament games basically, and I think it'll help you come tournament time to have already gone through that neutral site stuff. But it gives you a little leeway. I mean, Alabama played a hard schedule last year, lost damn near all of them.
Yeah.
And then played great in conference play, obviously, but lost. I mean, had 10 losses or whatever. It didn't matter. So I think if there's a time to play a hard non-conference schedule, this would be the year to do it. Should be a good one, man. So anyway, that's the roster. They're set. Shouldn't be any other issues. Now we're waiting on scheduling news. We'll see what happens. I put on the board that I think Purdue and Birmingham is likely. I think Houston is possible. Certainly still. We'll see ACC, SEC Challenge. I've heard Clemson, Miami. Who else? Maui, of course, is already set. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. But, Hoops Giving. I don't think that's going to be NC State anymore. I've heard Ohio State is possible, which I've seen them pop up in some preseason top 25s. So, that could be another legit non-conference game. So it could be, if it all gets set, it could be a pretty awesome schedule. How many are in Neville? I don't know. You just got to travel a little bit to go see some of these games. So it'll be fun, man. I think they got the roster to do some. I was on a show earlier today, and I said, listen, I think they have every piece to win a championship and go to the Final Four. It's just a matter of how it comes together, injuries. But I don't look at this roster, and I don't think they're missing any pieces. I don't. I look at them and go, I think they've got big man leadership, shooting, depth. I think they have a roster to compete for a championship and make a run at the Final Four. After that, it's luck of the draw. It's if you're hot when you need to be hot in the tournament. It's other things that have got to come into play. But from a foundation standpoint, the roster, I think, is there and capable and built in a way that's capable of getting there. Then you just gotta try to make a run, which is all you can do in college basketball. You just build the best roster you can, and then a bunch of stuff's got to fall into place. And you got to get hot at the right time and all that stuff. But I think the roster is in place. It's got enough pieces, enough versatility, and enough depth and I don't see any glaring weaknesses. Like, whoa, there's a huge hole here. I don't see that. And you got to start there, and then you build it in the offseason. You go from there.
No, I mean, I think all that's spot on, Justin. I think that is a wonderful way to put a bow on this, man, to take us home, because I cannot disagree with anything you just said.
All right, well, let's roll. We're getting into the talking season of everything. We'll come back with some basketball. That'll wrap us up for basketball show. We'll come back, maybe do a show after media days, whenever they do that. And then maybe once the fall gets going, and practice starts and stuff, we can kind of maybe do a few before the season gets going. All that goes. Maybe we'll come back on if we figure out the schedule. Maybe we'll do a show talking non-conference schedule, because we've already got SEC. So maybe when we know more there, we'll come back and do a show where we pretty much know the entire schedule, and we can kind of go through that. And that might be good. That might be a good one. All right, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Go to auburnlive.com, subscribe, $1 1 month, and then go to the YouTube channel. If you're listening, subscribe, turn on notifications, do all that fun stuff. And we'll see you over on the corner later.